All right. Well, hello there. Welcome to Winterviews Series 3. We're in Series 4. Series 4, Episode 3. I'm your host, Catherine Silva, Cat for short. And today we have Corey Farrenkopf in the house to talk about eco-horror. How are you doing, Corey?
Doing all right, Cat. Just living life, you know.
Yeah. Yes, that's all we can do right now, it feels like. Did you have a snowstorm today? Just out of curiosity.
No, we're supposed to get like snow on Saturday, which is kind of a bummer. Like I was planning going to go to BosCon up in Boston, and I'm like, if it's going to be snowing, I don't want to be in Boston. You know?
Yeah.
Like
Yep. I hear you.
For snow days.
Yeah, we were supposed to have a snowstorm that was supposed to be like 10 inches, and then it got downgraded today, and it turned into rain mostly. But now the storm on Sunday, which I'm sure will be the remainder, whatever you get, is going to be like an apocalypse.
I'm sorry.
It's just, it's on one hand, it's really great because it's a snowy winter. We haven't had one of those in a few years. So for my day job, which is outdoor sports and winter sports at that, it's great. And on the other hand, the shoveling, not so much fun.
No. I live on a major road, and my driveway is like one of these guys, so I have to shovel it as soon as it gets bad, and I just feel very old afterward, which is not great.
I guess at least it's good that you have you're able to just kind of push downhill, maybe.
That's true. Yeah. Silver linings.
Yes. Yeah. So today we're talking about eco-horror, which is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. But before we get there, I forgot. Let's just have you introduce yourself to our audience. Just tell them a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Corey Farrenkopf. I am a writer and librarian who lives on Cape Cod. For you who don't know, Cape Cod is the little arm that sticks off of Massachusetts. It's silly and it's constantly eroding. It's great. So I'm the author of Living in Cemeteries, which is my debut novel that came out from Journal Stone almost a year ago. And then I've got a short story collection. It's all eco horror. It's called Haunted Ecologies, and it comes out tomorrow, Valentine's Day, the perfect time for romantic end of the world musings.
Yep.
I write a lot of short stories. I've had stories published in like Deadlands, Strange Horizons, Weird Horror. I've had stuff published in Nightmare. I'm also, like I said, I'm a librarian. I also am part of the Blue Marble Librarians. We're like a group of New England-based librarians that do a lot of sustainability and ecological education. So that's like
cool.
My day job. That's part of my day job. My real day job is I'm just a librarian. I check books out to you and order books and all that kind of stuff. But I also do a lot of eco work with libraries, and it's great. So
yeah, that is really cool. I didn't know that existed, but it makes sense that it totally does. And speaking of which, on the subject of eco horror, which is always present in our daily lives, eco horror can range from anything with like man versus nature to talking about environmental sustainability, how things are kind of falling apart, humans' relationship to nature, just as an umbrella term. But we're going to sort of look at it more in the lens of the sustainability sort of piece, because that seems like that's what a good chunk of your work was focusing on for Haunted Ecologies. So my first question for you, as I look at my tiny text on my phone, is as a writer, have you always felt a connection to the environment in your works?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to a lot of like my earlier novels that are never going to see the light of day. Um, a number of them have to do with like the forests around where I grew up, have to deal with like weird growth, strange ecosystems, just things that shouldn't be in like the waters off of Cape Cod, in the waters off of Cape Cod. Um, and I've always cared a lot about like animal life, about the flora and fauna of where I live, and it's always kind of come through in my fiction. Cape Cod is a big tourist destination. We're kind of like an
Mhm.
island economy, basically 4 months of the year we're like slammed and there's our population's triple and it's just utter chaos. And usually the rest of the year is very quiet and pretty chill. And it's been changing a lot recently because more people have been moving here and a lot of the habitat's been getting cut down. So it's like real sad. And a lot of that comes out of my fiction because it's just strange to see. Like I grew up in Harwich and the uh, land around my parents' house was all forest. And so my
Mhm.
buddies and I used to just like wander the forest all the time and spend tons of time out there. And where we used to just roam, there's just housing developments now. It's literally
Mm,
uh, most of it, which is wicked sad. And it's like there's so many. We have such great like native birds that live down here, and they have less and less places to live now. And I don't know. It's sad.
yeah.
So I take the sadness and I put it into the story. So it doesn't haunt me,
Yes,
but it does.
that's what us sad writers do. We just channel it all into words. Yeah, no, the losing that familiarity of your childhood haunts, especially when they are woodsy, I completely understand. I grew up, I'm in Maine, so we're in a mid-coast area, so there's small towns. We're close to the coast, but not quite right on it, and there were always these forests in the backyard of my house, and my friends and I would go back there and walk around in the woods, and they clear cut a huge section of the woods down to make a road that's kind of like a back road out from the fairgrounds that are uh they're sort of like on the other side of the hill from us, because those got too popular and they couldn't, like, the road was too narrow for people to go in and out on the same track, so they had to make a giant, like a humongous road that goes up and down hills, like all around the woods, and then out further up the road uh, from where my parents' house is, and it's pretty horrible.
Yeah.
It's like they took out so many trees, and there's just nothing but a road. Uh,
Yeah. Ugh.
yeah, yeah, it's really just sad. Um, but anyway, um, the follow up question is, I guess besides channeling the sadness uh, of losing these spaces and sort of mourning the environmental impact, what about it has drawn you to want to write this environmentally conscious subject matter in a horror related capacity?
Yeah. I guess the I guess my easiest answer is like I hope in some way it makes someone change the way they think about stuff, you know? So if you can use horror as a lens to be like, hey, look at this terrible thing that is happening that might be in some way happening in your life. Like maybe it'll help people change. Maybe it'll give people like, this is an extreme version of this thing. Like, yeah, maybe I'm taking part of like overconsumption, or like I'm way too into fast fashion, or like I don't have good recycling habits. Like those are kind of like bottom tier things. But it's through the horror that I'm using, hopefully it gets people to think about like, I'm part of these ecosystems. I'm part of this world. All the things I do contribute to this mountain that's kind of piling up of
Hmm.
just horrible things. And
Hmm.
it's kind of funny because like I feel like people are always like, you shouldn't have didactic stories. You shouldn't be like super moralistic in what you're doing. And all the stuff I've written has always kind of been that way. And it's not like intentional. I grew up Roman Catholic. I'm not religious anymore. But I always feel like there's something in the back of my head that's like, you need to be a good person. You need to be a good person. Like, how can you do that? And I'm like, I'll do that with like spooky creatures in basements of like just condos that are falling into the sea because someone didn't listen to like the right way to deal with ecosystems. um, and the horror aspect of things is, when I was first writing, I didn't consider myself a horror writer. I was writing mostly like literary fiction that was just kind of strange or had like fabulous elements in it or something.
Hmm.
And then someone pointed out to me, they're like, hey, you're doing like, most of what you're doing is like kind of genre adjacent. Like, is there a reason you're not more involved in, or not more committing to genre? And I think I just had some like hangups when I was like 22 and I was still in college. And I was like, oh, yes, I must write the fanciest of literature, or
Hmm.
whatever was going on in my young brain. And then I was like, the thing that I love doing is doing like dark speculative fiction. And there's like no reason for me not to be doing that. And I've always just like gravitated towards that. So once I kind of
Hmm.
embraced it, all of my stuff has gone down this path that is kind of quiet horror, kind of dark fantasy, kind of somewhere between all of those things. And so much of it is dealing with like ecologies, with just like terrible climate stuff.
Hmm.
So it's a combination of all that. It's like the morality and just like, I was always like a dark kid when I was growing up. Like my favorite movie as a 3 to 4 year old was Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh,
And
okay. Yep.
yeah, I went from that to watching. I think of like the movies that were really important to me as a child as the movies like when I was sick that I'd watch on repeat.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you probably saw that movie like 100 times. You know, kids get sick all the time. But I watched Nightmare Before Christmas pretty endlessly, and I watched Spirited Away pretty endlessly.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
that's a good one.
right. And Spirited Away is like essentially on some level an eco horror story, right? You've got the polluted river that shows up. He's like,
Hmm.
help me, and then he pulled the thing out. And then like he starts vomiting all of the bicycles and trash and automobiles that got dumped in the river and stuff. And I don't think, like when I was younger, I don't think I thought of it that way. I was like, this is beautiful and like strange. I love the music. Um, but I've rewatched it a few times lately, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's 100% like a climate eco sustainability narrative. And I mean, so much of
Hmm.
Miyazaki's work is that too. So it's funny when you go back as an adult and you look at things you loved as a kid, and you're like, oh wow, this is a lot deeper than just like, oh, spooky monsters and magic.
Hmm. Yeah, I hadn't really even thought of Spirited Away as being an eco horror, but it is. It totally is.
Yeah.
Um, and Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, is probably one of my favorite Miyazaki films, and that's totally eco horror as well.
Yeah.
So for anybody who has not watched Hayao Miyazaki's work, you definitely should check it out. Um, but I just want to draw attention to a few comments that we have gotten since we started. We had Scott in the comments saying sad writers unite," which is very true. There's a whole band of us. And then we also had Ronaldo Katawaro say, "Hi, Corey. Congrats on Haunted Ecologies." Um, and then Scott chimed in again with, "I think of your story in Tiny Nightmares often. So good." Now, I'm not familiar with that story. Would you mind just telling me what that's about?
it's the first story in the collection. So it's the one that kicks it off. And it's also the one that kind of ties. So it's called We've Been in Enough Places to Know. So that starts it off. And then the final story in the collection is called Waterlogged, which is the second part of that story.
Okay.
It's about a guy who works as a property manager, or not really manager, but like inspector. He like goes and checks on everything. That's like a big job on
Okay.
is I've got like a buddy right now who does it, and he has like, I think it's like 80 to 100 houses he has to just check on a weekly basis to be like, all right, all the pipes are fine, the electricity is okay, there's no like raccoon family in here living in all their mattresses, because that
Mhm.
happens. So it's about a guy who does that as a job, and there is this like outrageously extravagant condo building that's built right on the edge of the ocean.
Mhm.
And he goes in there and he has to like kick people out every once in a while, and that's really sad. But there's this creature that lives in the basement. The basement's flooded, so it's kind of this aquatic reptilian many-mouthed monster. And
Mhm.
there's a family that is in there kind of squatting, and he's like, man, I really don't want to kick some kids out of here with their parents, like that's terrible. So he's like, yeah, if you can be out tomorrow, like that's fine, like, but just watch out, there's a creature in the basement. And
Mhm.
so it's just he's able to have a conversation about her, about having a home, why people give up homes, and essentially like this story is about people deciding to place this monstrosity in an area where it destroys nature, but also like if you're going to build something so big, why not make a building for like workers and families, affordable housing, make something that
Mhm.
people can afford, because like that's such a huge thing on Cape Cod, is everyone makes everything into outrageously expensive, like
Yep.
McMansions, or they like subdivide houses. And instead of making them affordable, each level of the condo goes for like 4, 5, 6, $700,000, and like no one
Mhm.
can afford to live here really, which is rough. But so it's a story about that guy going and inspecting this thing and kind of loving this creature in the basement and having no idea if it is violent or not.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I hadn't realized it was that story. Because that's isn't that the one that opens this collection, Haunted Ecologies? Yeah. So it's a hell of a story to start things off with, certainly. And one that all of you should uh jump on because it's amazing. Um we have a comment from Stephanie.
Hey,
Nightmare Before Christmas was absolutely a favorite of yours. Interesting connection between your early preferences and your current works of literature.
yeah. Stephanie's my cousin, and she's about a year older than me, so we grew up together for our whole younger lives. So she
Oh,
would.
gotcha.
Oh, thanks for coming, Stephanie.
I was going to say Stephanie has all kinds of tidbits about young Corey that we can maybe ask about.
Yeah,
What other
right.
dark things? Um, so I guess next my question is going to move on to nature and no, it's not. No, it's not. I skipped one. Sustainability symbolism
Mhm.
as it relates to our earlier conversation. This is so awkward. I'm sorry. Just like trying to read the tiny letters. Eco horror lately has been about spreading a message of sustainability or the need for it.
Mhm.
Um, and this is also, we've already kind of talked about this, which is you trying to spin a similar message in your own works. Um, and I guess so that we're not just sort of talking about the same thing. Have you had any commentary from any readers or other authors or anybody who has taken that message to heart, or anybody that kind of has felt some similar feelings with that, with your writing, I guess, on that subject?
Um, don't know. I know. So I'm very good friends with Eric Raglan, and Eric runs Curse Morsels Press, and he and I we swap work all the time. So I know he and I have conversations about this, and a lot of his stuff and my stuff kind of like weave in and out of each other as far as like what we're looking at. Like we both have stories about woodpeckers, endangered woodpeckers, and we both are birders. We both very much care about those things. So I would say the two of us are in conversation in some ways. I'm trying to think. One of the funny things that I hear from people who have read this collection, like I've had some early readers and some reviewers like talking about it online, is just how bleak it is. And I didn't realize that I wrote a super bleak book. And a lot of the endings of these stories, like they don't end particularly happily, which is kind of a bummer. There's a few that do. There's a few that end on like glints of hope, but there's a lot that are just really sad. And I think that in some ways reflects my outlook on a lot of it, which is just sad, which is unfortunate. But not in my writing life. In my library life, my ex-wife and I, we were both librarians for a number of years, and we both did a lot of environmental and sustainability work. And we did a lot of work with like seed libraries around here, and got like libraries in this area to like either start seed libraries or consider them. And people would reach out to us from like other libraries to talk about sustainability programs and like climate prep programs and native gardening programs, pollinator garden programs, water conservation programs. So like the two of us did a lot of that for a number of years. And so yeah, I don't know if as many writers have, and other of my peers have like read my stuff and been like, I'm gonna stop using plastic cups or something. But yeah, I've definitely had people reach out to me and talk about. I've got a story that's not in this. It's a piece of flash fiction called the Great North American Clothing Heap, and it's about like fast fashion, where it's this giant sentient blob of clothing that's kind of wandering across the pastoral fields of the Americas. And I've had people talk to me about that one where they've been like, yeah, I didn't really think about like where all the clothing goes when it's no longer in use. And like so much clothing these days is just made out of materials that's just like, it's basically just gasoline made into cloth, which isn't great. And it just deteriorates. It's also not great for us, but so it's made people in my life rethink what they're doing, what they buy. And it's always weird talking about eco-horror, because then I feel kind of preachy sometimes, where I'm like, make sure you're using your money well, so you're voting with your wallet in certain ways and all that stuff. And then I'm like, you also got to live your life, like I don't want to tell you what is right or what is wrong, but maybe you'll be like, oh man, I love birds, so maybe I like will buy less crap.
Yeah, no. And I guess I didn't mean, do you know anyone that's like completely changed their whole everything now that they've read your stuff? More the the emotional or mental understanding of like they feel similarly about things that you've talked about, or they also notice those things. And it's hard not to be bleak about the way that the environment is. It's hard not to feel helpless about how things are going and how they've been.
But I would say that like it's even though I talk about how bleak the kind of thing is, like I can look at I'm just like a librarian. I'm not like some big fancy dude. I don't have like environmental degrees or anything, but I can see the work that I've done and the work that the Blue Marble librarians have done and the work that my wife has done, or my ex-wife has done. And then I look at a lot of the people who I've done this work with. Like I did a lot of work with this organization called APCC, which is the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. And I've got a buddy named Dave and his wife Marina. They run Edible Landscapes of Cape Cod. And I look at what each of these little pockets are doing. And like Dave and Marina are like planting these native edible landscapes like all over Cape Cod, and they've got tons of work. And through their outreach and through their work with libraries and stuff, they are convincing people like maybe we shouldn't have lawns as much. Maybe we should have more native pollinator plants that like will make the bees happy, or that will feed the birds in the winter, or will like attract hummingbirds and stuff. And things oftentimes when we see like the giant picture, it's just like, oh my God, things are terrible. But like people are doing great things in little pockets, and like the more people who do the things in their pockets, like
Hmm.
the more we have a chance of like having a good future, you know?
Yeah. All that educational outreach is really important. It sounds like you've done quite a bit of that. So,
Trying.
well, I mean, every little thing that's done is makes some kind of impact. So it's what you're doing is really good. It's really
Yeah.
valuable. So Eileen here is saying so many of them are thought-provoking, reminds me that we all need to do what we can do to make sure this beautiful place where we live is still here for future generations. Echoed sentiments all around here. And then I also just wanted to throw this up here, which is Stephanie basically agreeing to fill us in on all of your dark childhood
That's funny.
nonsense.
Yeah. I wish I had a better memory. Not better memories. I'm just saying I don't. My brain does not hold on to things amazingly well, which is unfortunate.
No, I get that. There's a ton of stuff from my childhood I don't remember as well as my brother does. So it's, you know, teach their own.
Yeah.
No, lost my place. So now we're on to the question that I was going to get to before, which is nature and the apocalypse, and there's quite a bit of that. The correlation here is an easy one to make, especially in regards to my last question. You have a couple stories in the collection that contend with characters needing to change their horrible behavior towards the environment in order to avert an apocalypse, or us seeing what the apocalypse looks like because we didn't do enough in time. Is this a fear that you yourself have? And if so, how did those fears influence your writing?
Yeah, I am a very fearful person. Um, I think a lot of people, if you're intelligent and you live, or if you're conscious and paying attention, if you live on the coast, it's always a little. I was like, well, one of those hurricanes could be the bad one. And Cape Cod has two bridges on and off of it, two lanes on each going each direction. So if you need to get off, you can't really get off, which is super dark. And they need to go under construction because they're like structurally unsound right now. Fun fact. So yeah, no, I spent a lot of time worrying about that. I should also say like yeah, how do I want to phrase that? So through doing so many of these environmental programs, I did a lot of work with CREW, which is communities responding to extreme weather. And I used to have them come and do talks at the different libraries I've worked at, and a lot of them would talk about sea level rise. So they would show you maps of predictions of here's 10 years, here's 20 years, here's 30 years, here's 40 years, here's 50 years. And one of the last library I worked at, Sturgis Library over in Barnesville Village, it's towards the bay side of Cape Cod Bay. And it was basically like, in 40 years, there's going to be water in the parking lot. And I was like, that's not great, because behind us were like, there was a road of houses, and then behind that was another road of houses. And that's if predictions are like the absolute worst, like it might not be that bad, fingers crossed. And there's a bunch of places I like to walk around here and bird watch, and one of them, I think it's the Wellfleet Audubon has it, but they have these markers that'll show you predicted sea level rise. So you'll go on this path and you'll eventually hit one, and it'll be like 2070. And you're like, wow, that ocean is very far away from here. and then
Mm.
you'll walk a little farther and you'll see 2050, and then that, and seeing those visualizations is just nuts. I live in the dead center of Cape Cod at one of the highest points though, so like I might just be on an island at some point, so like there's that. But also being on a hill, there's erosion on the hill, so thinking about the erosion all the time. Erosion,
Mhm.
erosion, erosion. Um, so yeah, I guess I'm pretty concerned about that stuff. I've done a lot of reading on like microplastics, um,
Hmm.
PFAS in the
That's
drinking
a
water,
scary
PFAS in the ocean, and like you keep seeing those like clickbait things right now. That's like your brain has tons of microplastics in it, and you're
one.
like, oh no. Maybe they'll make like a little video game system in my head out of the microplastics, and I'll just be able to live in like a little video game world. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe it'll actually be good. It's not going to be good. I don't believe that. But it's it's kind of nuts to be surrounded by that kind of thing all the time. I
Yeah.
feel like the internet right now is just clickbait of like, what do you want to learn to ruin your day? Like, how
Yeah.
do you want to be afraid today? Like, what kind of thing can we get your anxiety level going? How can we make
Yeah.
your your chest tight? And
Choose your fear.
yeah, and I think, I mean, all the algorithms know at this point that like I like science and I like animals and I like all these things, so they're going to show me terrible things about science, about animals, and I'm just like, Audubon, here's a little bit of money, maybe this will help, and it's my like $25 a year is probably not saving our endangered birds, but yeah. So yeah, I'm afraid.
Yeah. No, I understand that fear very much so. And yeah, I mean it's really hard to avoid all the negativity. And it does seem like everywhere you look there's just something new. Um but I think one of the stories that really spoke to me in your collection that was so it did end on, I will say, a lighter note, which I appreciated, but the burnt, was it the burnt floor?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, was I was really not expecting that story, and I really enjoyed it. And I wondered if maybe you could tell the readers a little bit about it, without giving things away.
Yeah. Man, how do I talk about that story? So the basic premise of that one is there's hotels in Florida around an amusement park that will go unnamed legally. That the whole top floor was gutted by fires, but they still rent it out, and they give you very cheap uh, nightly stays there, and they give you gas masks when you go in. I wrote this story pre-COVID by like a decent amount, and then it got published kind of either, I don't know if it got published during COVID or maybe slightly into it. Um, but I was like, oh God, this just sounds like a COVID narrative, and it was not supposed to be. So this father and mother save up tons of money and work overtime and just like spend all this time working as opposed to spending time with their family, in order to save up enough money to bring their kids to this place. But it endangers the kids because they have to have gas masks in this room that's super carcinogenic. But they're like, if you don't bring your kids to the amusement park by a certain age, they lose the magic. And it's supposed to be a bit of a commentary on like just how hard it is for like working families to sometimes make enough money to like do the things that like you're supposed to do in America. And like one of those things is take your kids to Disney World, not Disney World, uh, Disneyland,
We'll cut that
or,
out.
or any of those fun places. And it just makes me sad because like life's just so hard for so many people, and people have to just put in so many unnecessary hours of work. I mean, it's necessary because you need to survive, but like it would be great if we lived in a society where like everyone didn't have to break their backs all the time to like have a nice moment or to like give your family the thing you think you should be able to give them or provide for them. So yeah, the story, it's a little surreal. I think of it kind of sitting somewhere between like Brian Evanson and like George Saunders. That's how I've always thought of that one. Um, but yeah, that one's very near and dear to my heart. I love that story. And it's interesting because I don't know if it's as horror as some of the other things in there.
Hmm.
Uh, that one's one of the weird ones that fits in some kind of weird amorphous place between like three or four genres. Um,
Yeah, I think it qualifies as weird fiction. You
yeah,
know, it what spoke to me about it was, I mean, not only was it talking about, the working class, just and then money, um, but there is an appreciation for nature that comes in uh, towards the end,
yeah,
and um, and really the idea of this manufactured happiness that people sort of seek to find, without really understanding that you can find that happiness in the natural world. It's closer to you than you think it is, and so I just really, as somebody who works in an outdoor recreation, day job,
mhm,
I really appreciated that.
right,
um, the other one that, and now I'm going to forget the name of this one, so I apologize. This is
all good.
uh, about, it's a woman who is, you know, staying in a cabin, doing some translation work, um, and there are things outside the cabin trying to get in. Um, and that one to me definitely had a little bit more. Uh, there's more threat in that. There's stakes. There's this feeling of regret, um, and I wondered if you could talk about that one a
Yeah.
little.
So that one's called Translations for a Dead Sea. Um, the creatures in it may or may not be in other stories in the collection.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint. So yeah, so those. How do I want to talk about that one? So those cabins are real. Those are in Truro. If you drive down Route 6, which is the highway on Cape Cod, when you go over this ridge into Truro, there's a bunch of white cabins on the side of the road, and that's where that takes place. I used to install fireplaces with my uncle for a while. When I got out of college, I had a hard time getting a. I got a degree in teaching, and I'm not a teacher, but I couldn't get a teaching job. But my uncle ran a fireplace installation company,
Mm,
and I was like, Uncle Larry, I need a job. I need to make money so I can pay my rent. So I
mhm,
worked full time installing stoves for a long time, and because of that, I got to go into weird places all over Cape Cod, and I installed one or two stoves in those cabins.
okay.
And so one of the days we were there, it was like the middle of winter, and it was frigid, and they board up these cabins, and it's pretty like doomsday proof for a lot of them. Because they're right on the water. Like when there's big waves, the waves are hitting the cottages. So it just made me think about like, what's this going to be like if the environment gets really bad? What if
Mhm,
what if the ocean is knocking on your door? Literally, what would you do? What would you have to do to prevent that? And what kind of thing would you do to save that? And the story is supernatural because like it's about a woman trying to translate this poem that her father bought a while ago, and he was a scientist and a scholar. And supposedly, this poem, if you translate it right, it'll either save us from like climate catastrophe or end up speeding it up. And she's not amazing at translation, and neither was her dad, so they don't know. And this woman views the end as inevitable unless someone does something. And she's like, "This is the only thing we can do. This is the only thing I can do." So it's about her translating that, being stuck in this cabin over winter, and then at night these kind of blind creatures are groping around the thing trying to get to it because they're attracted to the essentially like the magic that this poem is putting off.
mhm.
um, so it's about that. Yeah, like a lot of what I write ends up starting with the place. Like so much of what I do is like regional. I'll visit a place and I'll be like, man, I want to write a story here, or man, this place stuck with me, and then I have to figure out the story to tell there, you know. And so that was very
Mhm.
much one of those where I was in this place. It was winter and it was frigid, and I remember being there and just being like, hands in my coat jacket, and the guy I worked with who like really knew stoves. He was great at what he did. His name was Joe, and we just had to. It was just so cold, and like the waves were splashing. You get hit with like the salt spray, and I'm just like, this is terrible. I can't imagine
Mhm.
being right here year round. Um, and so that kind of pushed that one forward. And I love stories that are like about translation. I love stories that are kind of like dark academia. I
Mhm.
love stories that are getting at people discovering things from the past that are somehow magical or somehow connected to like some otherworldly beings. So like I think of Jeff Vandermeer has this story called Errata that I love, and it's about the character Jeff Vandermeer having to go out to Lake Baikal to translate these, or not translate, but like to rewrite a bunch of stories from this defunct literary magazine in order to like get his life back on track or something. And
Interesting.
oh God, I love that story. And I think my story is like riffing on that in some way, and I don't think I
Okay.
realized it till I just said it out loud, which is kind of cool. And I just love people who are playing with like people studying obscure, strange, esoteric things. Um,
Mhm.
and again, I went to Catholic school, so we spent a lot of time in religion class learning about
Mhm.
strange, esoteric things.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
So I think it's just in my blood. I think that's just where my brain is, and I think this was my way of incorporating that uh, with my like eco dread.
Mhm. No, it was a really good story. And like I said, the stakes were high. It was pretty frightening. So I liked it. Um, now another thing I'm going to ask you about, which I did not put in the questions that I sent to you. I notice that your stories, several of them don't really have an ending, or what we call, they're sort of an open ending.
Mhm.
Um, is that, do you consciously decide to leave several of your stories open ended, or is that a decision that you make because you kind of want people to interpret it however they want, um, or just sort of, tell me what the decision was there.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like if I'm giving very straightforward endings, sometimes things feel too wrapped up or they feel like too forced in certain ways. Like
Okay.
um, I like letting my readers imagine what happens afterward. I like them filling in the blanks. I like to think that whatever the story's doing will give the reader enough of like a breadcrumb trail to lead them to like some idea of what I'm thinking. But some of the stories in there, like there's a story about two young boys who are playing and like or who spend a lot of time in the woods up behind their house, and it's literally the woods up behind my old house,
Mm-hmm.
which aren't there anymore. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and they're kind of stumbling upon this very strange like old cottage. There's like in the woods up behind my house there used to be a bunch of these just chimneys from cabins that were out there like 200 years ago that just fell apart and no one claimed, and there would just be like a stone chimney just in the middle of a bunch of trees and whatever. And so it's about these boys stumbling upon that and learning that there's some kind of cult that's trying to raise this like eldritch forest god. Uh, and if the forest god's risen, it kills all the people in the town. It's terrible, and they want to save their families. But they're also young boys, and they don't actually know if it's real or not. And there's like an old man tending this garden out in the woods by these things, and he might be a cultist, or maybe he's not a cultist. And they make some decisions that if you read the story one way, they're like, oh, they're heroes. And if you read the story another way, you're like, oh my God, these are some deranged children. And yeah, so I like being able to leave people with that thing in their brain where they're like, oh wow, was that character actually doing the right thing, or were they doing this kind of like pseudo evil thing, like where they thought they were being the heroic ones or whatever, and were they actually the evil in the story? So I like people be able to get the different readings of it, different endings of it, and I know what I think always happens. Like all my stories, I know the endings, I know what is actually going on there,
Mhm.
but I won't. I mean, if you come and ask me in person, I'll tell you the endings. I don't ideally say it out loud for these kind of things in case like
Sure.
someone's reading of it. Um, but I mean, that's also the way I was trained to write short stories. Like I studied, I had a specialization in creative writing in college. I went to school for English and education, got a bachelor's in English and then a master's in education. But a lot of the classes I took, they would talk about leaving these open-ended stories and how it's really important to let your reader to like trust in your reader and to trust that they will be able to fill in the space afterward, and that it's really important for a story to live off of the page.
Mhm.
Um, but it is funny because like some of the readers on my the reviews that I'm seeing coming up and stuff, and I know I'm not supposed to read my reviews. I really should stop reading my reviews because
It's
who boy,
really hard.
bad for your brain. But I
Yeah.
appreciate people read my book, like there's so many books people could be reading and they read mine and it's like very kind. But one of the things that I see, some people do not jive with the ambiguous endings or the open ending stories. And it's very interesting because I know a lot of people who love it and then I know a lot of people who hate it. And so I think it's definitely a very polarizing thing. So I'm going to not win with everyone on the open ended
Yeah.
stories.
I mean, that's for a lot of things though.
Yeah.
But something that occurred to me while you were talking, and this is a gamer reference, so I don't know if you play video games or not.
Oh, I do. Don't you worry.
Some very Witcher 3 vibes going on in the like, could it be this? Like, if we do this, this happens. If we do this, this happens. But there's always some bad, there's always some bad something that happens regardless of the choice that you make. Um, is kind of what some of these stories feel like to me anyway. Um, but but anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's just how I took a few of them. Um, the last story that I want to touch upon, before I go back to my rigid questions here, was, and I'm going to forget the name of this one again. I apologize. The Heap. It's the story with the Heap.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
That was
and that's that one stays with me, mostly because it reminds me a lot of something I wrote not that long ago. But I wondered if you could talk to us about that one and the inspiration on it.
Yeah. So that one is based on the story of like the ivory-billed woodpecker, which was the biggest woodpecker we had in North America. They were like, you can't see both of my hands, but they were the pileated woodpeckers, which you have in Maine, which are great. Pileated woodpeckers are like a little bigger than like a seagull, I'd say. Like I saw one very close once, and I was like, that's crazy. But the ivory-billed woodpecker are there's still some people that believe there might be a few that are out there in the swamp somewhere, but it's believed to be extinct. There was a sighting of one a while ago, supposed sighting. They never could prove it. And a bunch of birders went down there to try to find it. A bunch of scientists went down there to try to find it. And a bunch of towns just became this like center for these woodpeckers. And they couldn't actually get real proof of it or not. Some people will say it's super debated. So it's about like a spin-off of that. It's about someone, an ornithologist studying and being in the field with the last of these. I call them Gabrie's spotted woodpeckers, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's with this one woodpecker as it's trying to find a mate, as it's trying to live its life, but it's the last of its kind. And so she's like befriended it. She loves this little creature, just like I love birds and little creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And it eventually dies, and that's not giving anything away because that you learn that it's dead in the beginning.
Yeah.
And in this version of our world, the last the last specimen of every species, when it dies, someone has to bring it to this giant mountain of bones as kind of like a memorial and a final resting place to like acknowledge the passing of another thing from our earth that's no longer here. So she's traveling to put her friend to rest, and there's a guy on the train where she's traveling who wants to buy the thing from her, buy the skeleton of this little bird, because he's a collector, and he's like, oh, you're gonna throw it on the heap? That's a waste. Why would you do that? Like, it's gonna be here, and you can take this money and have tons of money and be rich, and it'll be great. And I just think that kind of thing's very evil. So it's kind of looking at this person who's trying to do this thing that's right and trying to give a final send off to this thing she tried so hard to keep alive and to support. And yeah, and it's a lot of that. Yeah, I'm also like, I'm fascinated by bones. I'm fascinated by like taxidermy, so that kind of stuff finds its way into a lot of my stories. But it's really like, it's also about a woman who's like dedicated her life to the study of this thing, and like this thing is now dead, and like who are you outside of that? Like, she doesn't have a lot of other relationships in her life. She doesn't have like, her whole existence has been trying to keep this alive, writing academic papers about it, and that's gone, and now she has to be a different person, and that also is very sad and very hard. And it's a thing that I think about, like changing, like who would I be if this happens, or what will my life be like in certain different contexts and stuff. And so that finds its way into it. But so yeah, I originally I watched a documentary on the ivory-billed woodpecker. I read some stuff about it, but I also had this image of this giant mountain of bone. And like I said, a lot of my stuff starts with like the image of a place, and that's one of the few stories in this collection that's not like a real place. Almost everything in this collection is either in real places in Maine, real places on Cape Cod, or real places in Western Mass, like Northampton, Amherst area. And that one's not. So yeah, and it's every once in a while it's fun to write something that's not a real place, where you can just make everything, and you're not like restricted by the fact like, oh, there isn't actually a pond or a river there, and then you feel bad when you lie about it sometimes if you're trying to give some kind of accuracy to a place. So yeah, that one was originally published in Three Low Burning Eye a while ago, and edited that, and it's one of my favorite stories I've written. It's like very close to my heart. Like I love that story. It's interesting. Like a lot of my short stories are like very much like a little piece of my soul. That sounds real corny, but man, do I! It's fun revisiting them. Like I wrote most of these stories between like the oldest one, and there's like 7 years old, maybe 8 years old, and the newest one, the novella, I wrote recently, but most of the other ones are like 4 years old. So they're things that I wrote 4 years ago when I was like a different person, and it's like, it's nice getting to see who I was back then.
Well, that one definitely stuck with me. It was so emotional, and I definitely saw pieces of myself in that. So it was, yeah, that one was like, it was really good. Yeah, major kudos. And all of you watching need to read all of these stories, by the way. This is part of the deal. This book, Haunted Ecologies, comes out tomorrow. So you know how you should be celebrating Valentine's Day with this book. So there's a few more questions here. One of them is about environment as a character. You just talked about how you're basing a lot of your places in your stories on real places, sometimes not. I loved the fact that the places in that story were not real places. I just fell into it so much easier. I don't know why. But could you, I guess, talk a little bit about what it means to you to include these places that that are part of your memories, that are part of these feelings that you have about the environment. Is it, do you prefer writing places that you know and are, are rooted in reality, or do you prefer to write something that's totally not real?
Yeah, that is a hard one to answer. So, I mean, if I'm being honest, like I don't often know if I'd really choose what I'm writing. A lot of the times I
Mhm.
get an idea and whatever it is, like I have to do that. Even if it's a terrible idea, even if it's a novel that's never going to see the light of day, if it gets its hooks in me, like I just do it. Which probably isn't the best. I'm trying to like get a little away from that in certain ways because like I have a lot of these trunk novels that they took a lot of my life and they're never going to see the light of day because I felt like I needed to write this thing. So, like I was saying, like a lot of the times, like I go, we've been in enough places to know the condo that's in that is a real place. Like when I
Mhm.
was 24 or 25, my ex-wife was working at an organic food market, and in the summer, Cape Cod, like we function because we get a lot of J1 students. They get J1 visas where they come over and work from mostly Eastern Europe. Now
Mhm.
there's some like Asian countries that are sending more people over. But when I was younger, it was mostly Eastern Europe. And so there's a guy named Max who he took us to this collapsing um, condo that was massive, and he was Russian, had like a really intense Russian accent, and he was like, "This
Mhm.
is so beautiful," and and I was like, "Man, I can't get this out of my head. I can't get this place out of my head." Like, because we didn't go inside, like it was fenced off, like we weren't going to do that. That's illegal.
Yeah.
Um, and but I was like, I wonder what it would be like inside. I wonder what it would be like with the water in there. So sometimes like places just get in my head and I just need to do something with them.
Mhm.
I don't I would say the majority of what I write is in real places. There's some stuff that I write every once in a while that happens in kind of like a generic suburbia too, and that's kind of freeing in certain ways where I'm like, you think of like some Stephen King fiction. I know his stuff's super rooted in Maine, but also like the whole like kids on bikes sort of idea where it's like
Mhm.
a time where like there's family living in this house together and there's a bunch of neighbors and it could be anywhere. Like that's kind of freeing in some ways because there's like everyone knows that place. Everyone
Mhm.
has seen depictions of that place and it's fun to play in that sandbox where people are familiar with this thing that doesn't really exist anywhere. I mean, it might exist some places, but not where I am.
Mhm.
So that's always fun. But I guess when I write in places that are made up, my brain makes them into real places, if that
Okay.
makes sense. Like so many of the things that I write almost become memories. Like I'll be able to revisit, like I can see the entirety of like the tap 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 of a beak in my head and I can see each part of it and I can see like
Mhm.
the hotel that she stayed in and like the little stores where she was and like the path that leads up to it. Almost like it is a real place.
Mhm.
So I wonder if my brain does something that kind of like tricks itself in order to write about a place that's not real, that imagines it as a real place or kind of creates it as a real place.
Okay.
Like that's the goal of being a writer, right? Is like you want to make everything as real as possible. So maybe I'm just saying
Yeah.
like, something that's like this is what every writer does, Corey. That's just how their brains work. Um, yeah, and whenever I make up a place, I try to give as much concrete detail as I possibly can to make it feel lived in, to make sure like
True.
you know the scent of the forest, you know like the feel of like the hotel bed, you know like
Mhm.
what the weird metallic taste in the water because they filter it strangely or something, and I always think that's very important because like you want to anchor your readers in something they're familiar with. You want to anchor your readers in something they can see themselves in. And I feel like if I'm not doing that in my fiction, I'm like failing. So that's like one of the major things I always focus on is giving people the sense of place, giving them the ability to like feel like they could go there someday. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, but I don't know if I like one more than the other.
Okay. Yeah. It was kind of a silly question to ask, to tack on. But it's just, you do such an amazing job with creating environments in your stories and really fleshing them out, that just made me curious. So So now we're into our wrap-up questions for the evening. And these are, fairly standard. We ask the same questions almost to everybody. So our first question is, what are your favorite instances of eco-horror in films or television shows or books or games?
Yeah. I'm always bad at answering these because I always space on them. So I prepared some things beside me.
All right.
So we have the Marigold,
Ah,
Andrew F. Sullivan.
I've been
This
wanting
one
to read
does
that.
like city eco horror, and it's beautiful. And like, God, I love the weird raccoons in this. I love the way that like the Earth is trying to reclaim the horror that is this city. It's also really funny, and there's like this beautiful moment where there's like a cab driver, and there's this genetically modified like raccoon dog thing. And like he loves this raccoon dog thing, and I loved it, and I just wanted it to have such a happy ending. And there's also this like meat puppet character called Cabeza. He just looks like a head cheese, and it's this disgusting thing that lives like beneath the city, and like it talks to these children and it's like trying to help them out, and it's you just feel so sad for this thing, and you feel so much love for this disgusting meat creature.
What?
Um, I don't know if I can speak highly enough about this book, but like Andrew does an amazing job, and like line to line, it's beautiful. Like God, he's such a good writer. And also, if you ever get the chance to see him read, he is such a good reader. I saw him read at StokerCon last year and at
Mm,
ReaderCon, I think the year before that. And I'm very excited for whatever he has coming next. So his stuff's great.
okay.
Um, Karen Russell has a story in Orange World called The Gondoliers about
Mm,
these sisters who live in like post-apocalyptic Florida. Everything's flooded. They pull barges around using echolocation like bats to try to get to different places, and they like ferry people to places, and they're like part of this new economy where people have to help each other out by bat echolocation in order to live their lives. And
yeah.
like Karen Russell's one of my favorite writers, and a lot of her stuff weaves in and out of like ecological writing. She's got one called The Bad Graft about a person kind of becoming a tree, or like a
Mm.
tree's consciousness coming to a person's body, and that was beautiful. So I really love her stuff. Um, Andy Davidson's got a book. It's called The Hollow Kind, and it's up on my shelf
Yep.
above me. And
I
that one's
haven't read that
about
one either.
what?
I said I haven't read that one either, but I have it in the other room.
It's great. And I love what Andy
Mm.
does. Again, he's a very poetic. I really love my dark speculative fiction that is just like line to line beautiful. And Andy does that every time. Like, God, I love his stuff. But that one's about a family that's kind of abused this forest for making turpentine, I believe. But there's also something that lives in the forest that's kind of cosmic horror-y, and like um, a descendant of the family moves back, and like the house that she lived in is kind of haunted and has a bunch of bad stuff in the past, and like the town's corrupt, and there's like a guy who wants the property to make more money through like logging or something. And it combines like it's like a ghost story, a cosmic horror story, and an eco horror eldritch
Mm.
host entity story, and it's beautiful and it's great. So that one, I mean, you have to always mention Annihilation. Uh,
Yeah,
this book like changed my
so
life. Um, I feel like most people have probably read Annihilation at this point, but like
Mm.
at a very pivotal moment in my life, I read Annihilation, um, and I was working as a part-time person in a library while I was also installing fireplaces and landscaping and doing like 1,000 jobs. And this is before I really knew about like every single book that's coming out, because like I'm a librarian, I just read reviews all the time. I know every book
Mhm.
that's coming out. I'm involved in like all the writing circles and stuff. But I saw the cover of this book and I was like, man, that looks cool.
Yeah.
And so I read it and it was amazing. And I read that, and then I read A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, not an
Oh,
eco.
yeah.
I read them back to back, and I was like,
Wow.
wow, this is the kind of thing I've always wanted to be doing. Like this is the type of writing that I have felt called to. Um, and so that's kind of what set me on the path of doing what I'm doing now. But yeah, almost all of Jeff Vandermeer's stuff touches on eco horror. Like if you read his Ambergris trilogy, a lot of that is about these people colonizing by force this area that these mushroom people lived on, and the mushroom people have to go underground, and the mushroom people will attempt to get revenge across 3 books.
Okay.
It's beautiful.
All right.
Like so much of it is told from the perspective of an artist and an art dealer who are living in this kind of not modern but not super ancient city. And there's, oh God, it's just so beautiful. And there's a lot of like academic stuff in it. There's a lot of like found documents in it, and I love that. And I don't know if Scott's still on this. That'd be kind of funny. But Scott Moses's his split scream story, which I wish I could remember the name of. Is it on this one? It's hiding around here somewhere. But Split Scream Volume 1, the one that Scott has a story in it, that's kind of like a post-apocalyptic world that's been ravaged by like horrible things that happen in different like ecosystems. And I remember just loving that. And it's such like a weird, bleak story. And yeah, that one was great. So yeah, I would say those. I'm watching Scavenger's Reign right now on HBO, and that one's like kind of eco horror. It's like an alien planet, but it
Okay.
looks at like the evolution on this planet and how it's super different from ours, and how everything's trying to kill you, and how all these different ecosystems work together, and how some prey upon others. And it really gets at a lot of the ideas that I like to try to poke at in my fiction, but it does it through more of like a sci-fi futuristic lens.
Okay.
And I mean, like to some extent, a lot of Laird Barron's work deals with nature and deals with like the unstoppable forces that are out there, and oftentimes he channels it through like cosmic horror or strange entities. And like I think of what's the one they made the movie out of? It's called like Dash 30 Dash or X30X or something like that. It's an occultation, I think. And there's these people studying this land where like something is wrong and something has happened that's bad, and it's slowly like whispering to them. And I love stuff like that. Like there's either a creature in the forest or in this like natural environment that's like whispering something to convince these people to do something it wants them to do. And whether that's how nature gets its revenge on people by like eating them or whatever, or by influencing them to be like better human beings. Larry stuff's wicked dark, so it's usually to break the lines. So I'd say some of his stuff does that too. I don't know if he would consider it eco horror, but he might. I'll ask him. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good chunk of recommendations. Yeah.
Now, are you one of the people who, because Annihilation had a film version that was very, very different from the book, are you one of the people who liked the film version or did not?
I loved it. I mean, so the thing is, like, I love a lot of things. I am not a harsh critic. I was just like, the movie really captured the place really well. And like, I care about that a lot. And it got the atmosphere really well. One of my favorite things about Annihilation, that was the crawler and the tunnel that is also out there, and that wasn't in there. I was like, no, I wanted to see I guess I don't want to spoil things, but like, man, I wanted to see that. Like, I never really liked the monster at the end. I thought that was kind of strange. And I guess like the monsters was reflective. So it's like, we are the monsters. We're the ones who do that.
Yeah.
And I get that. And I didn't love that, but it was a good ride. It was beautiful. I thought they shot it really well. I am sad that it didn't do what it could have done, but like, I'm glad it exists, and again, like you could ask me most things. I'd be like, yeah, I enjoyed that. I got to sit down and watch a movie and like not think about things for 2 hours. Like that's great. Yeah. So yeah, but
yeah, gotta love Skull Bear.
Yeah.
Probably the most horrifying thing I had seen. Yeah.
For some reason, my brain paints it as a wild boar, but the wild boar is in the book though.
Yeah. No, the movie was the bear.
It was like screaming.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had nightmares about that. And I don't like stuff like that doesn't usually scare me, but I had nightmares about that. So they did a pretty great job. So I have I guess the last wrap up question will be do you enjoy writing eco horror over other kinds of horror? Is that your favorite?
I mean, I love writing stuff with nature in it, and I love writing stuff with animals in it. Like I'm always drawn to like weird creatures and things of that nature. Uh, I don't know if I like it more than other things. Like it was just what I was called, what I felt like I needed to write at the time.
Hmm.
And I spent so much of my life, like my library life, trying to educate people on sustainability and on conservation, and trying to give platforms to the different organizations where I live, and teaching people about what they're doing for conservation and preservation and stuff. So it's always been something I really, really care about. And I would say like a lot of the stuff I'm writing now is still that. It's still like I've got a story in the Deadlands called "The Ecological Impact of Resurrection: A Field Study," and it's about a guy studying the death rituals of animals,
Hmm.
and he eventually witnesses like these river otters that are like burying their dead, and they're not supposed to do that. And it gets into a bit about conservation, but it also gets a
Hmm.
bit about just like people ruining little animals' habitats, and that makes me really
Hmm.
sad. um, on a positive note, we have river otters again. I think they're called river otters around my house again, and
Oh,
they've been
cool.
here forever. And every once in a while, you'll see them, you're like, "That's an otter." um, so a lot of what I do still touches on this. Right now, I'm writing a lot of kind of like dark sci-fi. That's also kind of horror. That's looking at like the future of like
Okay.
very extreme versions of what chemicals in our water would do, or what chemicals in the ocean would do.
Hmm.
Uh, and that stuff's pretty dark. Uh, I also have another one about chemicals and animals and what it does to humans, and that's going to be coming out in a so Eric Raglan and I and Tiffany Morris are we've got like this 3-part eco horror thing that's going to come out at some point, and mine's like a far future dystopia thing where like chemicals have done bad things, and
Hmm.
oh, it's dark, and it's kind of set in a desert, which is not a usual thing that I do, but
Cool.
um so yeah, I mean, sometimes I like doing it,
Okay.
but sometimes, man, it gets sometimes when you're writing it and you're like, oh man, this is too dark. I just want to write like some cosmic horror that's just like spooky and atmospheric, but not actually dealing with the fact that like my drinking water isn't great.
Mm, yes, the things that hit too close to home can uh, really be a gut turn.
Yeah, too.
Um, yeah. So that brings us to the end of our show. Um, Thank you, Corey, for coming and telling us all about your amazing book. Um, and the book for everybody watching is called Haunted Ecologies, and it comes out tomorrow from Journal Stone. Uh, and that's how you should celebrate Valentine's Day. That's just how you should do it. Buy it for your loved one, buy it for yourself, uh, and just read all about the eco horror. Corey, tell us where we can find you to learn more about haunted ecologies and what else you might have going on.
Yeah. So I mean, I have a website, CoreyFarrenkopf.com. Most of my short stories are published in like online magazines. So like if you like my stuff, you can read a lot of it there. Um, you can find me on like every social media site, which is the biggest nightmare of all. So I'm on Blue Sky as Corey Farrenkopf. I'm on Twitter as Corey Farrenkopf. Hopefully, I won't have to be on Twitter much longer, but I have a book coming out, so I am shackled to the sad, disgusting, sinking ship that is that nightmare. I'm on Instagram as Farrenkopf451. If you like the little clever play on that one. I'm on Facebook because everyone was on Facebook at one point in time. But I'm mostly active on Blue Sky. All my stories, whenever they're published, if they're online, there'll be links on my website, or at least links to the anthologies that are in print. Like I've got a story that just came out in "And One Day We Will Die," the Neutral Milk Hotel tribute
Oh
anthology,
yeah.
and I feel good about that one. That one was again a good chunk of my soul put into a story. So you can find me there. The other things I have coming out, like I've got the short story collection coming out. I've got that like novella coming out with Cursed Morsels and that like 3-person split thing, and we don't have that announced yet or anything as far as like release dates. I've got some stories coming out. I've got a like a far future eco horror story coming out in Flash Fiction Online in March. I've got like a librarian cosmic horror flash piece coming out in Kaleidotrope at some point. I've got something coming out in Chthonic Matter Quarterly, I think next winter. I've got a bunch of things that are just like kind of away. I have a billion stories on submission, and I've got my agent has my next novel, so hopefully she likes that, and we can do the next round of edits pretty soon and put that out to editors. So yeah, I'm dabbling in a billion different things right now.
I was gonna say so many things.
Yeah.
So all of you should definitely find Corey and stay in touch with what he has going on, because there are so many things going on. And yeah, so thank you all for coming tonight and listening to our chat about eco horror. I would be remiss if I did not mention that I also have an anthology that's coming out in 12 days now, I think, that is Boreal, an anthology of taiga horror. So there are certainly eco horror stories in that. And that can be pre-ordered from Strange Wilds Press through my website. Just because we had a discussion about eco horror, and there's forest horror aplenty. But again, thanks for coming out, and we will see you for our next episode, which is next Thursday. That'll be February 20th. We will be talking to Wendy Wagner, and we're going to be doing a related topic, which is Sporer, in preparation of her novel, which is coming out later this year. So come join us for that, and we'll see you then. Have a good night.
Thanks for coming, everyone.